All right, and we are back and better than ever. Still 6-0. Nice little bye week last week. Thank you everyone for joining. If you're joining live, or if you're watching this on playback, thank you for watching. Make sure that you're subscribing to the YouTube channel. I always forget in the beginning to ask people to subscribe. I always ask at the end when maybe not everybody's watching. So make sure that you are subscribing to the YouTube channel. We are, last check, we were at 96 subscribers, and that was earlier today. So very close to that 100 mark that we want to get to, so I can do on the show shirtless. So hopefully we can make the Wisconsin game a shirtless
Just four
show.
more, folks.
So we can make the Wisconsin game a shirtless show, and hopefully it'll be a happy shirtless show. So we'll see that. Oop. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Oh,
You never left.
Can you hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
okay.
I hear you.
All right. So let's get straight into it. Penn State obviously coming off their bye week, and we have the big bad Wisconsin Badgers going to Camp Randall to play. 7:30 kick, nice primetime kick on NBC. Tim, a couple weeks ago, I think that we were all looking at this Wisconsin game as maybe one of the, I don't want to say easier games on the schedule, just because going to Camp Randall is always difficult. Although Penn State has had some success there, last decade or so. But it was certainly looking like it was going to be on the easier side of things as far as like where expectations were at heading into the season. Think about what Wisconsin could have been. They lose Tyler Van Dyke against Bama. They're on their second string quarterback. And it just seemed like Luke Fickell hadn't quite got this program to where, maybe some people hoped that they would be in his second season. All of a sudden, Wisconsin's gone on a bit of a winning streak, and we can talk about that winning streak more. They won 3 games in a row. They're now at 5-2, and they looked quite impressive in all 3 of those wins. So before we get into like the knee deep of what Wisconsin is, outside of the Ohio State game, is this Penn State's toughest challenge remaining on the schedule?
I would say it is. And I'd also add that game at Minnesota in late November could also be a pesky one too, potentially. But I would say outside of OSU, this is the toughest remaining game. And it's funny how you mentioned how, a few weeks ago we thought this might be a relatively easy game. And now we're thinking, this is going to be it's going to be kind of tough. I feel like we're back to where we were thinking this game would be in the preseason, as in, the second toughest non-Ohio State game. I think most of us agreed that USC would be the toughest non-Ohio State game. And, they passed that test. So now they got another one coming up here. Like you said, things got a little shaky. I feel like the last time I really watched Wisconsin in depth was when Alabama was just lighting up their secondary, and Braden Locke is quarterbacking them because Tyler Van Dyke goes down, and they just looked all out of sorts. And to their credit, to Braden Locke's credit, coach staff's credit, he seems to have found some footing. Still, I still think he's definitely beatable, but he's looking better than he did a year ago. And they have found a ground game with Tawi Walker now being the bell cow back after Ches Malusi, who was splitting reps with Walker, decided to step away due to injuries. So and of course, it's Camp Randall at night. Camp Randall is always a tough place to play. But I do like, and I guess we'll get into the predictions later on, but I still like where Penn State stands. I mean, not just because I think they're the better overall team, but just because they also have Wisconsin's number. They've won the last 5 games in a row. James Franklin is 3-0 against them. You have to go all the way back to 2011 when Russell Wilson was quarterbacking them to find the last time Wisconsin won. And all the current players on the Wisconsin roster were all in elementary school when that happened. So
I was going to say, and there's been obviously Luke Fickell, completely new regime in Wisconsin and what they're doing. So although, yes, it's like good that James Franklin, for whatever reason, has had some success against Wisconsin, and even dating back to Bill O'Brien. Unfortunately, probably doesn't mean a whole lot, just even considering that the last time that Penn State went to Camp Randall, 2021, right? Not too many players on that team are currently on this team, right? Like Jaden Reed.
I think Malusi was the only one I could recall in that, and now he's no longer playing.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, Jalen Reed would have been a freshman on that 2021 team, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, not a lot of
well, we do have somebody on Penn State's roster who was on Wisconsin's roster back then.
True. Good old Nolan Ritchie. So, yeah, we'll certainly get into that dynamic as well. So, yeah, I would agree that this is, probably the toughest game as far as outside of the Ohio State game, obviously. It's weird to call it a trap game just because, it's not a ranked Wisconsin team, but a 5-2 Wisconsin team at night at Camp Randall. Like most other times, if we go back through Big Ten history for Penn State, this would be, a really big matchup. And not to say that it isn't a big matchup, but
I wouldn't call it a trap game at all.
A trap game in the sense that it's a look-ahead spot for sure. And even coming off of the bye, I would be curious how much was, and when you talk about a bye, it's not so much James Franklin as much as it's analysts and stuff like that. Where was some of their focus? Was it with Ohio State? Was it with Wisconsin? Just because we will say this, James Franklin after a bye has not been exactly great. I think he's at 5-7 or 4-7 now. And some of those wins have been Kent State and UMass the last 2 years. So that's the only thing that I'll say about the bye that, okay, I mean, it's better that Penn State's coming off a bye than anything else. But for whatever reason, Penn State has been bitten by the bye in years past. So that combined with the fact that you do have this Ohio State game that, okay, it's not as important as years past where it was literally a make or break game for Penn State to get into the playoff, right? Penn State can lose to Ohio State and still be fine. Mm-hmm. But that's still going to be a really big game for Penn State. So just curious where, the mindset is within the program. And that's kind of why I would say this is a trap game. Although to what sounds like what you're going to say, you wouldn't necessarily call it a trap game.
No, I wouldn't. I don't think the staff is looking ahead to Ohio State. I think they understand that, this Wisconsin is a good team. Camp Randall's a tough place to play, and it's at night. They understand they got to win this game if they want to go in and play Ohio State as an undefeated team and still be very much in a prime spot to host a December playoff game. Or maybe even if they can, you take care of business at Wisconsin, and if you can somehow upset Ohio State the following week, suddenly you're talking about, competing for a Big Ten title. But, they're not going to, again, they're focused on the whole 1-0. They want to take down Wisconsin, who, certainly commands plenty of attention. This is not like a noon road game at Purdue, which actually I don't think they've announced time yet for Purdue, but I imagine it'll be a noon road game. It's not one of those types of potential trap games.
I know what you're saying. That the throwback ESPN2 with Pam Ward or Beth Mowins on the call. Yeah, that type of trap game.
You got no Eagle Todd Blackwood on the call for NBC, so it'll be a good broadcast to watch. But yeah, I think the team's locked in and focused on Wisconsin. And then nice thing is, I know you mentioned, yes, in the past we've had issues with bye weeks, but I think in this case, it was a good thing. This bye week will be beneficial to them. They were able to enjoy the high of winning a tough road game at USC for a bit longer, but not have to immediately turn around and then refocus on the Badgers right away. And even more importantly, it's a chance for guys who've been dinged up, thinking especially of one Mr. Nicholas Singleton, to maybe get to 100% or very close to it. And hopefully they can be their old explosive self. And, we can, see this team really play to its potential.
All right, so let's fully get into it. Penn State, once again, going on the road to Camp Randall. They are 6.5-point favorites. And I'm not sure that's where the line opened at, but I know it pretty quickly went to 6.5. I know it's been there since, I believe, late afternoon Sunday. So even if it didn't open there, it's kind of settled there and it's stayed there. So an interesting line. I think that I probably would have picked it to be a little bit higher. Probably would have been in the 8.5, 9.5 area. But can understand the skepticism with this Penn State team and their knack for keeping things close. So 6.5 point spread for Penn State going into Camp Randall. And, we've kind of touched on a little bit here and there, but what is concerning about this game? What are things that the Badgers do well that maybe Penn State doesn't do as well that could give Penn State some problems, Tim?
Well, I mean, obviously they've found themselves a run game with Tawi Walker. He's able to, he's been a real bell cow for them. And I have his stats pulled up. The last couple of games he's run for over 100 yards, including 198 against Rutgers a couple of weeks ago and 3 touchdowns, and had 126 last week against Northwestern on 23 carries. So he averaged 5.5 yards a carry against Northwestern, 8.3 against Rutgers, and then 4.9 against Purdue. Now, I mentioned those 3 games because those are the 3 games where he's been the guy. That's where Ches Malusi stepped away due to injury and then no longer became a shared backfield. It basically became him. They do occasionally throw in another guy, Cade Yakimelli. It's just whenever Tawi Walker needs a breather, but it's mainly Tawi Walker's show on the ground. So it's going to be very important for what has been a very stout Penn State run defense to continue to be that way. If they're able to get the ground game going, then it also opens things up for Braden Locke to do some damage through the air. And so that's one thing that concerns me. Can they slow down Tawi Walker? I'm hopeful they can, but that's a concern there. I think also I think the other thing is just how healthy is Penn State's running back room? I'm talking Nick Singleton mainly, because we know what Katron Allen brings to the table. He can pick up those good 5-yard chunks, maybe 10-yard chunks sometimes. He's not an explosive play guy. Nick Singleton is when he's healthy, but I think it was kind of clear against USC he wasn't fully healthy. Now, to his credit, Andy Kotelnicki utilized him in the passing game. He scored the touchdown, which helped send it to overtime late in the game. So I'm sure they'll find ways to get involved. But really, I want to see Singleton get his explosiveness back. So that's something that concerns me too. Because if they're not able to be as explosive on the ground, then it puts a little more pressure on Drew Allar in the passing game, which, to their credit, USC basically kind of made him a bit one-dimensional, and they stepped up and answered the call. But, you'd rather see a good balanced attack from Penn State than otherwise. So those are the 2 things that concern me. And I know Wisconsin's pass defense has been pretty good. I mean, the Bama game aside, they've done a good job not giving up the deep balls.
USC was little. They gave up over 300 yards against USC. I just want to jump in real quick, Tim, just to talk about Singleton. I think for me, looking at this Wisconsin team, and I kind of mentioned this before we went live, just that it's a weird team to get a handle of, just because they have looked so good these last 3 games. And granted, it is against the likes of Purdue, Northwestern, some of the
that was going to be my next point, but
the dregs of the Big Ten. But still, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing against those teams, and that's dominating them. So the metrics like SP Plus really like Wisconsin, but you look at some other metrics and especially defensively, there are ways that they can be attacked. S&P Plus has them as the 11th best defense in the country, which is obviously very good. For the record, Penn State's defense is second in S&P Plus. So I love S&P Plus and love Bill Connelly, but you can also, I wouldn't say that Penn State's the second best defense in the country. But as far as what Wisconsin's defense does, so the best way to put it would be that they're well coached. They struggle to generate sacks. They don't really, force a ton of turnovers. They're not, full of athletes that are getting into the backfields. But what they do well is that they bend but don't break. They'll give up some yards. They're almost very similar to Penn State in that way. And then they clamp down within the red zone. They're tied for first in the Big Ten in preventing touchdowns in the red zone. And I know they have an extremely high stop rate, which is, basically whenever it's 3rd and 8 at a Penn State game, and you hear the old guy behind you saying, "Get off the damn field." That's what Wisconsin does really, really well. So it's almost a throwback team in a sense, at least defensively, and what they're able to do. The fact that they're not necessarily generating a ton of sacks or creating big plays or creating chaos. They're letting teams do what they want between the 20s, which means that I do think that Penn State will have the opportunity to move the ball. They're good at generating or stopping explosive plays and things like that. So someone like Nick Singleton, like you mentioned before, having him healthy, is he a guy that can be a game breaker for Penn State? Wisconsin's only allowed one play over 40 yards this year. If Nick Singleton is able to break off a 40-plus yard run, that's a really, really good sign for Penn State that they're going to be able to win. So just wanted to jump in there and just say that as far as defensively for what Wisconsin brings to the table, I think that's their stronger side of the ball. And I think that will be the biggest, you do the X Factor posts on Fridays for BSD. I think for me, that X Factor is what is Penn State's, specifically the rushing attack, able to do against Wisconsin's run defense, which has been solid, but there's certainly holes there. So you're going to talk about the secondary, though, for Wisconsin. They have a pretty strong secondary, all things considered.
Right. They've been, I was looking at, the Justice Stats post before we signed on here. And, their passing defense is rated 7th in the country in yards per game. So it's definitely like one of the better pass defense. And so they don't give up a whole lot of, they're not a team you're not necessarily going to go over the top on. Like you said, similar to Penn State, very bend but don't break. They're not, they're not going to let you beat them deep. They're going to make you try to march downfield to get in the end zone. But, again, I think, but where I think Penn State can be effective, though, I think they can still be pretty effective in the pass game, though, is because of one, Mr. Tyler Warren. And I say it's because Wisconsin is either going to, bracket him, double team him, just really laser focus on him, which in turn will free up, maybe Trey Wallace or Julian Fleming, Omari Evans, Liam Clifford to get open and, make some big time catches. Or, if they just decide to play him, one-on-one, well, guess what? I think it could be another big night for Tyler Warren. And also, of course, Warren's going to line up in called the Wild Warren package where he can just run straight at you like a missile or maybe he might even, throw it from there because, guys, he was a quarterback in high school, so he's got that capability. So I'm sure they will, regardless, just having Tyler Warren out there, I think still leaves Penn State as I think they can still have a lot of success through the air. And if Wisconsin, I don't think they will do this, but if they actually decide to sell out against the run and stack the box, I really think Drew Auer can cook against that Wisconsin defense.
Yeah, I mean, it really just depends, just like all these other teams, right? Like, what do you want to take away from Penn State? And by and large, and this is like just generally the case in football, you want to take away the run. Wisconsin is, as we mentioned before, kind of middle of the pack when it comes to yards per play and stuff like that. Despite the fact that they do have that lofty S&P Plus ranking, they allow 4.37 yards per carry allowed, which doesn't sound all that high, and it's not necessarily like a terrible number, right? It's not like up in the 5.5 or 6 area, but that is 15th in the Big Ten. So that's way down in the Big Ten. So again, there's holes on this defense. They're smaller. They run 2 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers. Only 2 guys with their hands in the dirt. So it's a smaller defensive front. That doesn't necessarily mean that Penn State can definitely run on them, because as we learned last game against USC, I think everybody going into that game thought that Penn State was going to have success on the ground, and by and large, they really didn't. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I think that like I said before, I think for me the more confusing part of this matchup and kind of where it's going to be won or lost is Penn State's offense versus Wisconsin's defense. Just because I personally, when I watch Wisconsin's offense, and we can kind of get into their offense a little bit versus Penn State's defense, Not the Wisconsin offense of old, where they're going to line up under center with a fullback and 2 tight ends, and only have 1 or 2 wide receivers in at a time, and go super run heavy. They do run the ball more than they throw. It's 58% to 42% as far as those run pass splits, but they're doing a lot of that out of shotgun, doing a lot of that with 3 wide receivers, if not 4 wide receivers. So a lot more spread sets that Luke Fickell has brought in with his offensive coordinator Falongo, one of my personal favorite offensive coordinators, as James Franklin pointed out at his press conference, and East Stroudsburg guy as well. So connection there. Maybe just one to keep in mind down the line as far as hopefully Andy Kotelnicki's here for a long time. I just want to point that out. But it's weird saying this just because I feel like I've been a little less trusting in the defense versus the offense, but I do have a lot of faith in this Penn State defense against Wisconsin's offense. What about you, Tim? What are you thinking as far as Penn State's defense goes when they match up with Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think the key is if they can limit Tally Walker, take away the run game. I really like Penn State's chances in this one because Braden Locke, when he has then they can just tee off on Braden Locke, and Braden Locke he's solid when he's not under pressure, but if we're able to get pressure on him, that's when he wilts. And so we've seen this time and again in second halves where Penn State just really clamps down defensively, and then they're able to just start teeing off on the opposing quarterback and, garnering up pressure, eventually getting a sack or 2 on them. So I can certainly see a similar scenario playing out where as the game goes on, I think Penn State's D-line can really cause problems for Wisconsin's O-line over time.
Which is a solid offensive line, but
it's a good O-line, yeah.
Certainly not the Badger offensive line of years past, going back to the Bielema years and things like that.
No, and the thing is, Braden Locke, he's not a mobile quarterback at all. He's not a guy you get to worry about torching you with his legs. He's not somebody you have to put a spy on, I would say. So they have that going for them. And so receiver-wise, probably better than your traditional Wisconsin teams pre-Fickell. Vinny Anthony is basically their version of Omari Evans, deep ball threat. And, Will Pauling's like the reliable possession receiver. So they do have some guys on the receiving core, but, none of them is like they're not like, say, what Jahan Dotson was for Penn State a few years ago. They're not some, guy who can break a game open or who's, where you have to be wary of all the time. So the key is really, I think Penn State take away the run game, keep Tally Walker in check. And I really think they can then start to tee off on Braden Locke and, pressure him, get him to make some bad, get some turnovers, either, forcing fumbles or getting interceptions. I think Locke I believe he's thrown a pick in each of his last 3 games. So I think they can certainly get a turnover or 2 on Saturday against him.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to it's not apples to apples with Illinois, just because Illinois was definitely a little bit more, I would say more reliant on their passing game, just being that they had 2 really good wide receivers in Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. I think that both those guys, not that, like you said, Wisconsin does have 2 solid pass catchers and a couple other weapons offensively, but I would think that both of those Illini wide receivers were bigger threats as far as Penn State goes. But as far as the Altmaier comparison to Braden Locke, and to be clear, I do think Altmaier is the better quarterback, but like we saw in that Illinois game, Illinois had some success early on when Altmaier was being schemed up. He was a 1-read quarterback, and a lot of earlier in the game, or at least that first series, that 1 read was open, and obviously Illinois then had success. I think we're going to see Wisconsin do something very similar. I actually got this stat from Landon Tangwell, former Penn State offensive lineman, and just a great Twitter follow, but he pointed out that Locke gets the ball out on average at 2.5 seconds after the snap, which is 3rd fastest in the Big Ten. So even Penn State aside, Wisconsin does not want Locke to drop back and really scan the field and go through progressions, right? It's one read, and if not, you get the ball away, or you're going to just dump it off and take what the defense gives you. So against Penn State's defensive line of Abdul Carter and Denai Sun and all those guys, that's certainly going to be even more so the case. So the question is, can Tom Allen scheme up something defensively where you're able to, take away that first option and get Locke thinking, showing that you're a man and dropping back into zone, or showing that you're in zone and going back into man and things like that, just to get
able to do that against Altmaier. I mean, I don't see why he couldn't do that against Braden Locke.
Just given that slight hesitation, as you pointed out, he's had quite a few games. I think just in every start that he's had, he's thrown an interception. Which, if Wisconsin wants to beat Penn State, I think that's going to be one of those check marks that you look at. Do they take care of the ball? And specifically, does Locke not throw an interception? Obviously, 2 weeks ago, excuse me, Abdul Carter dropped a nice, easy interception. Right, that would have put Penn State in the red zone. So can Penn State capitalize on those opportunities as well? Because once again, Braden Locke's, all things considered, a really solid quarterback, being that he's back up in the position that he came into, but he's someone that Penn State will have the opportunity to take advantage of, whether it's getting after him. Even though Penn State hasn't had a ton of sacks this year, they still have been really, really good at generating pressure. And even when they don't generate like pure pressure, can they confuse him enough and just get him off his game a little bit and pick off some passes? So like I was saying before, my worry about this game, and worry is all subjective, but is more about what Penn State's offense is able to do against Wisconsin's defense. Are they able to run the ball? Can Penn State take advantage of, or not so much take advantage of, but how is that Wisconsin's secondary is just going to match up really well against Penn State's wide receivers? How is that going to play out? I have a lot more faith in this Penn State defense, even though they certainly do have holes against a Wisconsin offense that has been a little hot and go, and still in the in-between of what exactly they want to do under Phil Longo when it comes to spread and what the athletes that they have. So any other thoughts as far as reasons for concern? I mean, we also talked about a lot of those reasons for optimism, especially defensively. You kind of mentioned before that you do have Penn State win this one, and again, the line is 6.5. So what is your kind of your score prediction, or how do you see this game going? Just because we've seen in so many of these games, against Bowling Green, against Illinois, and even against West Virginia in a sense, especially in that first quarter, Penn State get off to these slow starts. So do you think we see another slow start from Penn State, or are they able to, kind of reverse course and come out and put up a double-digit lead early in the first quarter?
I mean, boy, you never know coming off these bye week. I'm sure I know I've read from practice boards, it's been a point of emphasis that they want to start faster than they've been starting on both sides of the ball. It's not just the defense that gets off to slow starts. The offense, 2 weeks ago, they only put up 2 field goals in the first half on USC before they got it going in the second half. But I think they'll get off to a better overall start. I'm going to say they draw first blood in this one. I do think Wisconsin they'll put up some points in the first half. But again, I think it's a close game at halftime. Maybe Penn State's slightly ahead or it's tied. But I think once again, I think this Penn State team, they're one of the best, if not the best in the country at making halftime adjustments, especially in the defensive side of the ball. And I really think they're going to just put the clamps on the Badgers in the second half, take away the run game, force tee off on Braden Locke, and that's when the floodgates could potentially open with turnovers or 3 and outs. Basically, the defense for Wisconsin starts getting gassed, and ultimately that allows the run game to start picking up bigger chunks in the ground, allows Drew Allard in the pass game to, light them up more. But yeah, I think but given how these teams are defensively, I can see this one. Score prediction is a little bit slightly quirky. I'd say something like 30-16 Penn State. So Penn State covers, but I I'm going to take the under. The over under was 47.5. So
yeah, this was a game that I'll be honest, earlier in this week, before I really did a hard deep dive in Wisconsin, I was definitely more worried about, especially when that 6.5 came out, just because, let's be honest with ourselves, Vegas is kind of has been on the right side of what Penn State is probably going to do when it came to, that Illinois game. We all thought the line was a little bit too low, and then Illinois ended up covering. And same thing with USC. It was, 4.5, and Trojans, as even though they lost, were still able to cover that. So seeing that 6.5 kind of made me, pause and think about what was actually going to happen. Like, what is this Badger team exactly? And I think if you would ask me 2 days ago, not that I would have said Wisconsin would have won, but I would have said, if Penn State and Wisconsin in the scenario of going to Madison and being on the road and playing in prime time, if Penn State and Wisconsin play 10 times, Wisconsin maybe wins, 3 of them. I don't think it's even that high anymore. And I kind of hate myself for, if I'm being honest, because I wanted to come in here and say that, I think Wisconsin is, going to be a real test. And not to say that I don't think that they won't be a test, but it would have been something like 24-20 that Penn State's able to, escape late, almost like we saw, maybe not exactly like the USC game, but something along those lines. I like Penn State in this one. Like, it's hard for me to see, once again, talking about like the different scenarios of how this game plays out. We talked about during our USC preview, and although it didn't end up exactly how I thought when it came to, USC was able to generate way more explosive plays than I was hopeful for, but I could see that type of game happening for USC against Penn State. I can't envision that many scenarios where Wisconsin's able to pull off the upset. It just feels like they lack, just honestly, like having like that guy offensively. If Tyler Van Dyke is there, maybe he is that type of quarterback that can come out and have a, 28 completions on 33 throws for 275 yards and 3 touchdowns type performance. I just don't think Braden Locke has that quite in him, and the skill position guys for the Badgers just aren't quite at that point yet. I think that this has been a step forward for Luke Fickell and for the program to even get to 5-2 at this point. And after losing Van Dyke is props to him, but Penn State should not lose this game. Like, I understand that a trap game or not, just where it's at on the schedule and having Ohio State ahead and Penn State having the flaws that it does and the way that upsets can happen, it's certainly possible. But I also have Penn State by 14. I'm going to have 27-13. So I do think it's a little bit on the lower end. But again, I kind of have more faith in the Penn State defense than I do the Penn State offense. I just know for my psyche going into this Ohio State game, this is like getting the win matters the most. I'm still on that, like, I'm not going to apologize for wins whenever, but it would be really nice to see Penn State, maybe not like a full, net crack game, but I want to see Nick Singleton come out and have 120 yards. I want to see them be able to consistently run the ball and not struggle the way they did against USC. So kind of looking at the old, the process versus the results in this game.
Sure be nice to get something akin to the 2008 game in Madison when they came in there and beat them 48-7, just like
beautiful game. Derek Williams punt return, Darrell Clark, Alvin Royster, just Aaron Maben, the sacks. I miss it. That would be absolutely fantastic, but not sure that type of performance is going to happen. But would certainly take basically like Illinois 2.0. Just maybe like a little bit more Penn State pulling ahead a little bit more than they did against Illinois, where it was still annoyingly close score-wise, but kind of similar to what the box score showed. So on a scale 1 to 10, so I mentioned before Penn State played Wisconsin 10 times. I think that Wisconsin would win 1, but on a scale 1 to 10, as far as like what is your worry level for this game? Because I would say I'm at like 3.5 maybe. Like, and I hate once again. I hate that I'm doing this because Penn State loses, I'm gonna look like such an idiot, and I really try my best to come on here and not be like biased Penn State fanboy that's just like, we have nothing to worry about, go State. Like, but I don't know. I just am not.
I put it somewhere between a 4 and a 5, because I mean, look, Wisconsin, it's a good team. They may not, I think Penn State's better. They got the talent depth advantage, but it's a good team. It's at Camp Randall at night. It's going to be a raucous crowd for that one. And like I say, Penn State's a tendency to start slow. So if they get themselves into a hole early on, like they did at USC, then it could be problematic. But at the same time, Wisconsin, they just don't have the same level of athleticism that USC did. Like they don't have, what's his name, Quentin Jenkins, the guy who ran the reverse for a touchdown on Quentin Joyner. Yeah, I don't call him Jenkins, Joyner. But they don't have somebody like him. Maybe the closest thing they might have is Vinny Anthony. If they're able to get, if Locke could maybe get a good play action going to him, that's a possibility. But if Penn State, bites too hard on the run, but other than him, though, I mean, they don't strike me as a team that's like really explosive. Like they're still a team that's going to march downfield and try to sustain drives. They do it in a different manner, as you said. It's a little more spread out. They still run more than they pass, but this isn't like the old Paul Chryst, Brett Bielema, run the ball 40, 50 times at you and just try to, just straight up beat you up front. But I just think Penn State. I think that it's going to end up being a little too much for them. I think they're going to, like I said, close game in the first half, but this Penn State team just really. I was watching I watched some college football YouTuber previewing this game, and he compared them to the Michigan teams of the last few years. Like Penn State, just like those Michigan teams, they just clamped down in the second half, like just shut down opponents defensively, and then offensively they get things going. So I think it's going to play out like that again on Saturday, and that's why I have Penn State winning by a couple touchdowns ultimately. But I put my win level to 4 or 5 because you never know if they did survive a -2 turnover margin against USC, but they don't want to be playing with fire like that again in this game. So if they're losing the turnover battle again on Saturday, then that would be a concern. But I'm hopeful that's not the case.
And once again, we did mention this, but I just want to kind of hammer it home that Wisconsin's wins are Western Michigan by 14, South Dakota by 14, Purdue they blow out, they win by 46. They blow out Rutgers, they win by 35, and then they beat Northwestern, and they win by 20. So Wisconsin's best win is Rutgers, probably, that a 4-3 Rutgers that has now lost to, they lost to Nebraska.
Frankly, that Rutgers team is not looking like they did maybe a few weeks ago.
Yeah, just lost to UCLA as well, and I know they have some injuries that they're dealing with, but
true.
So just from like that perspective of, once again, try to do my best. I understand that I'm a Penn State fan, and as much as I want to take my bias out, I can't always. But just looking at it from that perspective, it's going to be 5-2. But even with a backup quarterback, Wisconsin probably should be 5-2 at this point. So it's tough to say that even though that they're at home, that they're going to be able to beat the number 3 team, or even say a top 15 team. Even if we don't want to, Penn State's at number 3, but where they're actually at, we'll find out. But so yeah, all right. So we both have Penn State winning by 14, so we are in agreement on that. Any other final thoughts on Wisconsin? Also, by the way, we had Penn State had media availability tonight after practice, and seems like no news is good news because there's really nothing major to take away from the practice notes. Everyone that should be practicing was practicing, at least from what I saw. So no no, like Nick Singleton wasn't spotted or anything along those lines. So just want to point that out. But Tim, any other final thoughts on Wisconsin before we wrap this up?
Well, it's not the Wisconsin teams of old, but Luke Fickell's got he's got that team seemingly going in the right direction. I think outside of the Penn State game, they believe. Look at their schedule here. I believe they play. Where the hell is their schedule? Oops, here we go. I mean, outside of Penn State, they go on the road at Iowa, which I think that's a game they can win. Iowa, it is at Iowa though, so we'll say it's toss up. Oregon at home. Look, I mean, Oregon, one of maybe the best team in the Big Ten, perhaps. Don't see them winning that. But then you go out in Nebraska. Then you host Minnesota for your season finale, your big rivalry game. So, I mean, besides Penn State and Oregon, I mean, they could win their remaining games and, go 8-4, which, considering how dicey things looked when Tyler Van Dyke went down, it's a nice recovery for this team. And it's progress that Luke Fickell can point to in year 2 as he maybe prepares to try and take Wisconsin to the next level in year 3.
All right. So once again, make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube. Obviously, if you're watching this, you're on YouTube. So please subscribe so we can get to 100 followers. I'm checking the subscribe. We start this at 96. Are we still at 96? Yes, we're still at 96. So if you're watching now, you haven't subscribed, make sure that you're subscribing. Thank you to all.
4 fingers in the air. We need 4 subscribers for a shirtless Pat show. So
I was thinking about doing a Halloween costume on the post-game show on Saturday. So I might do that. But if we have 100 subscribers, I guess I do have to do shirtless. So one way or the other, I'll either be dressed up or I will literally not have a shirt on. So it's really swinging one way or the other. But yes, make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. Make sure you're reading our stuff at blackshoediaries.com. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at BSD Tweet. You can see Tim's Twitter handle. You can see my Twitter handle as well in case you want to follow us there. Thank you for watching as always. And we will see you late on Saturday night. Hopefully no overtimes this time. Did not like that USC overtime, so hopefully no overtimes this time. Let's get a clean Penn State win so we can come on here and talk about Drew's Heisman or Nick Singleton's Heisman or Tyler Warren's Heisman. I guess
Tyler Warren's Heisman.
I was going to say Warren's our Heisman guy now, although we can still talk about Drew's Heisman. Come on. All right. Thank you guys for watching. We will see you on Saturday.